If we take a look at a typical drawing, we notice that it is the shade which allows the object to be seen, to be defined. It shapes the contour, it fills its point in space. It is what gives it weight, it gives it mood and atmosphere. It could even give it texture and smell and timing and emotion and movement. So this idea that the shade is what gives an object its definition. Take that concept in drawing that we see in art and apply it to pretty much everything. What I mean by that is, in order for you to know I exist or one of your friends exists, is that all you see is their shade, the equivalent of the shade in a drawing. Now, although the shade can tell us a lot of physical attributes, the part that may be a little bit harder to grasp is take that concept of that shade and how its effect on light and sort of the physical attributes, and apply it to more than just the physical attributes of something, more than its contour and shape, but maybe you could say the contour and shape of how something occupies space, how it occupies socially, how it occupies interpersonally, with all of that mood and emotions and linguistics. Your shade is that sketched in part that you express or that you leave behind or that is impressed by your presence or by interaction with you. It's sort of your weight in existence, your weight in a ecosystem or environment or a setting in its atmosphere, what you contribute to an atmosphere, or how you interact with it, or how you move through it. In order to know someone, all you get is those shade-in parts, and it's because of the way these things shape and work together creates the outline of something. It's the silhouette of something. And every single person, every single object, every concept, concept, again, because we're not just limited to the physical, we're limited to things in the sort of mental plane. Though it's true you could say that's an extension of the physical, but for the purposes of just getting across the points, anything that exists in the universe, whether conceptually, imaginatively, or solidly, physically, is perceived only through its shade, only through the parts that outline that sort of silhouette of it. Whether it is sound, touch, taste, smell, whether it's things that aren't in the senses, but are still how you feel, the mood of something, the emotion of something, the presence of something. Now that is what the shade is. Now we have to understand what the phantom network is. The phantom network is taking that concept of the shade, translating it geometrically. How can you convert all of those vaguely layered concepts of the shade that we were just talking about into a geometric structure? There are an endless amount of ways you could do that, but let's start with just a circle. So you have 360 degrees in a circle. Each point can be plotted and a vector can be connected to each one. What it looks like is these sort of geometric networks or webs or fractals. What these are demonstrating is what it looks like when you outline how one thing is connected to everything that it's connected to, right? A line from object A and how it is related to everything that it is related to. And ultimately, because it's that shade is the centerpiece, you're going to form these sort of mandala-like geometric structures. Now, this is just an imaginary way of approaching what is just reality, what is existence, because it has to be translated into something that's perceptible to our minds in the same way that we see light reflected off of something, and that has to then be put into these processes, these circuits in the visual cortex and different processing centers in the brain, and then it translates what is just electrical signals and recreates them into a series of convex and concave patterns and shapes and different lightings and shading and depth and perception. Because all you get is the shade of something, and then you recreate that into the form that you can perceive it as. And this is true, again, for beyond just visual perception, but every perception, even just internal perception or instinctual perception. Every individual object, or every part of an object, every shade of an object has its own phantom network. So you could refer to something's specific phantom network, and you can also just refer to the phantom network in its entirety, which is all the different individual phantom networks. So now that we've assigned the shade to a geometric value, we can then go ahead and position it in a way that has us see what it's adjacent to, the phantom networks that it's connected to. Because you have a series of phantom networks that are representing a shade, and then that shade is stacked or positioned next to each other or arranged in a way that you see that this web kind of continues to grow out because things are connected in a way that's non-causal. And that's kind of, if you're asking the question, okay, what is the point of this? What does the shade of phantom networks have to do with anything other than just a silly way of looking at things? What we're actually doing is we're taking a look at causality and non-causality and understanding that that dynamic doesn't really exist because causality is more or less what we define as two phantom networks that are directly connected, which is your typical, this cause leads to this consequence. Non-causality is this cause leads to this consequence, but that consequence being several times removed from direct connection. So you might have a phantom network over here on this web, and then several phantom networks removed. It connects, and it connects because it's going through different phantom networks until it arrives at that one. What I've just described to you is the sort of underlying principle behind something that you're probably familiar with, that every culture, religion, and spiritual practice that's existed on the earth has come to the conclusion of, or has in some way believed in or elaborated on or interacted with. Commonly, you might know it as sympathetic magic. You might know it as voodoo or sin or guilt or injunctions. You might know it as mana or pneuma or the cloudsouls and whitesouls. You might know it as talismans or ancestors or heirlooms. In the evolution of this same concept, we have quantum entanglement. Now, out of all of them, quantum entanglement is probably my least favorite because it's the only one that tries to maintain causality as the main force. It just is finding a way to describe causality in things that aren't adjacent. But overall, it's just another evolution of this same idea. And this idea, when we take a step back and kind of look at all these magic systems that the world and different cultures have come up with, we're just calling them the shades and the phantom networks. Now, what this kind of means practically or day to day is that the shade that you leave behind, that is impressed into the different spheres of networks that you're involved in, traces back to you, right? Because it can be non-causally affecting you. So, for example, what are some things that you have your shade in? You have it in DMV records or legal records. You have it in dental records and health records and medical history. You have it in credit history, and you might have it in video. You might have it in recording. Every time you make a video, you're putting your shade in the camera, or voice recording, you're putting your shade in camera. Even in art and writing, basically putting aspects of yourself into these different mediums, which is natural and part of life, is that you're going to impress your shade into these things. What is important is knowing that, and especially if you study some of these different magic systems from around the world, you get a lot of different perspectives on this. And it's not that any of them are more right than the other necessarily. It's just that They're approaching it from different angles. They're showing you or highlighting which of these like phantom networks are the ones that, at least in their culture, they needed to look out for. Whether it was things that were sinful, or mana and how it was tied to the land, or the cloudsouls that would wander off. Different cultures, they believe that having even just your voice recorded was kind of trapping your soul, and it could lead to illness. And so all of these things, they do have the potential for that. And understanding where you're putting your shade, and even who's handling your shade, even people who talk bad behind your back or insult you, or in some way kind of thinking ill of you. It's part of that entanglement or sympathetic magic, is having these phantom networks that are non-causally, or in other words, they're removed from direct connection, but everything is connected because it all exists on this plane of phantom networks. And that could translate back to you, because you understand the beginning, what I was talking about is all that you are anyways is the shade, is the contour and the silhouette that you leave behind, or that you impress on things. Which means if that's all you are anyways, no matter where that is in the world, or in imaginative or in social spaces, in art or digital spaces, or wherever, that can affect you. Now, it could be positive, it can also be negative. What many of these different cultures and their magic systems practice was ways of either bringing that shade back or ways of protecting it. Now, people will often offer their shades because their shade is powerful or it's very influential. This is kind of similar to celebrities, or just like actors or famous people or performers or musicians. And what they often do is create a sort of alter ego or persona that can kind of handle all of the attention that people are, because it could be millions of people are interacting with their shade and wishing them well or wishing them ill, and it's a lot for you to take. So you create, very similar to the concept of a dream catcher or a web, and that web is going to kind of trap all of that. This is why in some cultures they would have talismans or different objects in which to put this regulation or this grounding effect into, because they didn't want it directly coming back to them. It's a way to catch the maltreatment of shade, so it's not directly coming back to you, because when it does, this is what health issues are. This is what disease and sickness is how the shade is being affected. Related also to things like luck and fortune or misfortune. Who you interact with, who your shade touches, or who your shade is being grabbed by or handled by. All of that matters a lot. If you have a medical history and it tells you all kinds of health problems you have, and then it's stored somewhere in a facility, all that's happening is that you have in writing these health issues, and that's going to continue to grab the attention of that shade, and it's going to continue to lead back to you, because there's non-causal interactions in this phantom network. It can find a train or pathway that will lead back to you. So how far you spread your shade across all these different social accounts, all these different physical spaces, all these different digital spaces, the more you spread it out, the more that there's opportunity for bad things to come back to you, but also maybe good things too. It really depends. Part of what these practices and these magic systems did was understanding when and what and where things were being mishandled somewhere. I mean, there were entire careers dedicated to people who would, tell you what was going wrong with your life, where your shade was providing ill consequences, where it might have gotten lost to, where it might have wandered off to, and also how to bring it back, how to reform with it. The last thing is, especially with how much biometric data is being recorded in social media using apps and filters and all these things, ways of trapping aspects of your shade that really doesn't need to be. Not everything should be written down, not everything should be recorded in such a way, because all that does is create these openings in your system, in your being or your body. And as the shade gets divided and divided, more gets weaker and weaker because it's spread to so many things. And then people lose the ability to feel like an individual or to feel confident or even to be healthy, because the part that allows you to exist and be perceived is your shade, and that shade is severed and separated and has gotten lost in so many different various aspects, many of which you forget about. You go somewhere or do something, there's never a point where you ground it back to you, or you reel it back to yourself. That is the shade, that is the Phantom Network. If you want to know more, you can pretty much look at any sort of magic system from any culture, religion, or time period in the world, and you'll see a particular evolution or a particular interpretation or a practice that involved that, especially as it was relevant to the people of that time. And then you might start to understand how that kind of looks, how it feels in the correlation or effects of everything, especially non-causally. But that's it for this video. Thanks for watching.